entrepreneur, jet pilot, peak performance coach, and best-selling author brings you Living Outside the Cube, where great thinkers and doers of our century talk about how to help you be your best. Here is your host, Fabrizio Poli.
Welcome back to another episode of Living Outside the Cube. Today with me, I have Joel Skousen, who's in connection with us from Utah. Hi, Joel. How are you doing?
I'm just fine, Fabrizio. Good to be with you again.
Okay, so Joel Skousen is a political scientist by training, a political commentator specializing in the philosophy of law and constitutional theory, as well as non-fiction survivalist, author and retreat consultant specializing in preparedness topics, particularly survival retreat and fallout shelter design and construction, and what he calls strategic relocation. He's also the publisher of a very interesting newsletter that comes out once a week called World Affairs Brief. Joel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's always good to be with you, Fabrizio.
So, Joel, tell us a bit about your book here, Strategic Relocation, which I find extremely interesting. Tell us a bit about how you decided to write this book and why, and what's the story that it tells, basically.
Well, this came out of the Y2K controversy. Gary North, who really was responsible for sounding the alarm about Y2K, asked me to come on board his blog to discuss, because I had worked some 30, 40 years in high security construction and design, to talk about, safe places, relocation, what people could do to get away from the potential of social unrest of everything melted down in Y2K. Even though I predicted that the powers that be would fix the problem, and they generally did, there were about 5 major incidents, but generally it was a success. They never gave Gary North credit for that, by the way. They only, laughed at him. But I realized that I had this wealth of information about having designed homes all around the United States and in Central America and Canada, that I had this wealth of information about the relative value of relocating for security. And so I decided to write the book in 1998, and it's been in continuous sales since then. It went through a major update in 2010 with the assistance of my son Andrew, which is the current 3rd edition that you showed on the video.
Yeah.
And we've got color maps and charts of every state and province of Canada. We discuss other nations around the world and relative safety. But my basic theme is, rather than concentrate on the best golf courses and medical care in your retirement, you really need to look for safety, long-term security from all of the world problems that we're facing.
So tell us what kind of thing could happen. I mean, you're talking about, for example, suddenly the banking system goes down. So I've got no cash in the house. I need to buy food for my family. I go to the ATM machine and it doesn't work because the banks are down. Now what do I do? Is that kind of scenario you're sort of thinking of?
Yeah, we actually cover the full range of threats. Everything from natural disasters, tornadoes, earthquakes, tsunamis. We cover where the threat areas, how to avoid those areas. But more importantly, I do cover what I consider to be the strategic threats. I mean, if you have an earthquake in California, you have other regions that can bring in supplies and they can get things back working in order. But if you have a systemic problem worldwide, like a major economic collapse, a major recession or depression that creates social unrest, if you have a war, I mean, we have China and Russia threatening and building weapons of mass destruction, and I cover a significant amount about the war threat. We have our own globalist governments in the Western world who are intervening around the world and creating a lot of hate and discontent. That's not going to end up well. And a lot of people don't believe there could ever be another war again, but there is going to be another third world war, and I fear it's going to be nuclear. And so people have a lot of things that they need to consider that are not being emphasized by the press. They're not being emphasized by our government. Even our own government is building, in the UK government, building bunkers deep underground. This isn't for terrorism. I mean, they know that there's a major nuclear threat up there from Russia and China, but they're not warning people about it. And so I feel my obligation as a person who's not only a political scientist who studies the geopolitical situation, but an expert in security, preparedness, and relocation, to give that information to people. Let them make the choices and decisions they need to make, but I want to make sure they have the options.
Yeah, surviving, I think, is an important thing. We just went through a 12-week survival course as a family about preparedness, living in the wild, how to light fires and all that kind of thing. And it made me realize how much I didn't know about, even just lighting a fire, which is really, really important in a situation like that. Or how do you provide food in the forest? I mean, fortunately enough, my wife being a herbalist, she recognizes a lot of the plants which you can eat and which you can't eat, which is useful. But even having like food storage and things like that, the everyday person doesn't think about that. The system doesn't educate people to be prepared.
Well, and one thing that I got from going through similar survival courses is, this is really tough. And even at best, living off the land in a rural forest or field environment is just barely survivable. And so why not use the wealth that we have to stockpile in advance so that you don't have to go to the woods, so that you don't have to dig mushrooms or, look, I have prepared in those things too, but I would much rather have a generator and food stocks and supplies, light bulbs, toilet paper, and other things and essentials. In fact, one of the things that I talk about people financially is, you can eliminate your future need for money by stockpiling in advance. If you don't have to go out and buy weekly or daily the things that you need because you've got it in your cellar and it's secure, then, you're way ahead of the game. And while we've got money and while it's readily available, let's do it. What does it cost you? It's like having insurance. We have insurance for life. We have insurance for cars and for houses and things. Why not have insurance for food, insurance for equipment and other daily necessities that we use? That's the philosophy.
Yeah. Now, in your book, you mentioned the different areas, and you do concentrate a lot on North America and Canada and that. Tell us a bit about which are the safest areas and why. And then maybe, because we do have listeners from Europe and from other parts of the world, where would be other parts of the world where you think would be a safe place to sort of be located for the future?
The basic principle about security in a crisis environment is your greatest enemy is population density.
Yeah.
Now, the world continues to move into more and more urban areas because there are certain efficiencies relative to employment and commuting and cost about living in urban areas. But urban areas nowadays have no potential for self-sufficiency. They're totally reliant on government. They're totally reliant on food, water, and a communication and transportation system that has to be extremely well-oiled to operate. Any number of things can stop trucking, trains, and other things from bringing food in. Any number of things can stop. For example, a massive failure of the electrical grid will shut down this modern economy. And within 3 days, people are starving, people are rioting, people are pillaging for food because that's how long it takes to empty out the store shelves in crisis. So, we have the potential of solar electromagnetic pulses. We have nuclear electromagnetic pulses that have the potential of taking down the grid. And it's amazing to me, Fabrizio, how I talk to people who are in charge of the grid. They conceive at the most that they might be out of electricity for 2 weeks. No one is preparing to be out of electricity for 6 months or a year. And that's a whole different ballgame. But if the authorities aren't preparing for that, it's no wonder that people don't ever conceive that this is a possibility. But it is a real possibility.
So the first thing would be move away from the city in a location which is quite remote, but obviously work-wise. But mind you, work-wise, it is getting a bit easier because a lot of people today can run their businesses online. And there is that possibility. I do that with my aircraft business. As long as I've got an internet connection and a phone, I could be anywhere in the world, really. But not everybody has that possibility. But I would say, and maybe hopefully you agree with me, that someone should go and look for something that they can develop, where they can work remotely.
Yes, it's really true. Although, that's the first thing that's going to go down in a major crisis is the internet.
Yeah.
It's a very fragile thing. So even though you can and should search for the ability to work offline, to get out of the city, realistically, most people are going to have to stay near the metropolitan areas to be tied to the job. Perhaps less than 1 to 2% capable of going online or doing a business. Yeah. You and I can do that, and I have used that as part of my strategy to live rurally with an internet connection. But Most people realistically can't. So I cover in strategic relocation how they can develop contingency plans. This is very, very important to understand how to get in touch with realistic news services like my World Affairs Brief, which really looks at these threats and will warn people in advance of the threats. How to live in a semi-rural suburban area close to within reasonable commuting distance so that you can get out and then have a retreat, have a place, even if you can't afford your own dedicated vacation cabin as a retreat, you can band together with friends or relatives and at least have an arrangement so that people outside of the city can receive you. You can stockpile supplies with them so that you have some level of preparedness outside the city. One of the most interesting things I talk about in strategic relocation about these contingency plans is watch out for these freeway beltways that surround cities. These are like moats. These are like big barriers or fences that you cannot pass by unless you, in advance, figure out where you can get over or under those freeways where there isn't an exit. This is a very important concept because wherever there's an entrance and exit to the freeway, those are going to be jammed, either with people getting on or off the freeway. But there are not numerous, but a minority of areas of overpasses or underpasses on the freeway that literally don't connect to an exit or an on-ramp. And those are the way to get past these major freeway barriers if you're trying to get outside of the city when there's a major traffic jam, as there was during Katrina, when everyone was trying to get out of the city of New Orleans at the same time. And literally it was just a parking lot on the freeways and people got trapped. People had to abandon cars. You got to think in advance of how to do that. How to have extra fuel stored at the home so that you don't have to run and get in line in the gas station if you decide this is a crisis, I have to get out of town.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the online thing, I mean, obviously someone's got an online business and they're making money, they need to sort of, you said, prepare. So if suddenly their business goes out the window because there's no internet, hopefully they would have stored enough food and supplies and maybe even have a vegetable garden going at their retreat place where they can constantly produce food, have a well where they can get the water from and be completely off the grid. Would you suggest then that the retreat place be off the grid?
Well, I always prefer to be on the grid where it's available because it's much cheaper. But yes, having at least a minimum amount of solar or generator or a combination of the two. And the combination of a solar and a generator really works the best. If you have enough solar capacity to run everything, it's extremely costly. And the battery cost every 10 years to replace it is high as well. Yeah. But if you have a combination of generator and solar, so you can run the generator twice a day for a couple of hours, and then use solar for the low periods where you're not using a lot of electricity. That really works the best. Now let me go back to your question, though, about where are the safe places. As I talked about population density being a problem. So the East Coast of the United States, where the average population is anywhere from 300 to 800 people per square mile, it's very difficult, even in a rural environment, not to get overwhelmed if there's panic and pillaging where people are flowing out of the cities. And in contrast, in the lightly populated western states of the United States, for example, the average population is 35 to 50 people per square mile. Big difference in terms of people being able to grow a garden in a period of famine without being overwhelmed with neighbors stripping it bare before it's even ripe. Canada, for example, has a lot more open territory. And so these are very, very good, safe places. Europe is a very high density area. It's been that way for many, many centuries. And so the safest places in Europe happen to be generally, areas of lower population density. Spain, for example, has a lot of low density areas, some good agriculture and infrastructure. And traditionally in war, Spain has been the furthest distance away from the battlefronts, which generally come from the east, Russia or Germany or whatever. Spain's been that area. I also like the northern areas of Norway and Sweden, and Denmark, or not so much Denmark because it's attached to the continent. Norway and Sweden have, I think, the best areas that are safe from, with the caveat, though, that if we have a Russian problem, the Russians will have to occupy at least southern Spain, or I'm sorry, southern Sweden and Norway, because their warm water ports from the Baltic seas have to go through and pass through those channels. So traditionally, all of the predators' nations have had to occupy northern and southern, southern Sweden and Norway. But nobody really wants to occupy the mid to higher levels of the cold climates toward the Arctic, and so there's a lot of areas for retreats that people have, and a lot of Norwegians and Swedish people have mountain homes and retreats in central and northern Sweden.
Yeah, they tend to be a lot outside as well. They're more in contact with nature. I mean, I find here in the UK, for example, a lot of people are city people, and they don't really know what goes on outside the city. And as you were saying, the city is a dangerous place to be when the grid goes down, because everybody depends upon the trains, the buses, the supermarkets for food and everything, and the ATM machines to give you your money. So that's. But I've been to Sweden and Norway a number of times, and I see that people live outside more. They're more in contact with nature. They got that more. They're more self-reliant as far as being independent and can live kind of off the grid. While in the southern part of Europe, where they're more into the city, and I see that in China now happening, where more and more people are being encouraged to move into the city from being outside, which is kind of interesting.
And so even in the UK, you have a lot of rural areas. In Scotland, you have a lot of rural areas outside of the cities.
Yeah.
In England, they're much higher population densities than the West or than
London.
the United
It's all
States
around
West or in Canada.
Yeah, I mean here in England, everything's around London area. You've got 60 million people in the UK, and I would say probably 40 million are surrounding the London south part of the UK. I mean, I'm up in the north near Manchester, and up here there's the population is a lot less. And if you go further north towards Scotland, there are patches of areas where you drive for like miles without seeing a person.
That's right. Now, when you choose a rural location for a retreat, for example, in the UK or in Scotland, for example, or even in Ireland, it's important to understand, and I'm reluctant to talk about this a lot, openly, because a lot of people are squeamish about it, but there really is a need for concealment. In other words, being that you're going to have an overflow from the London area as people spread out trying to find food, as they did in World War II after the Russians started invading Germany, the farms got overwhelmed by people from the city looking for food.
Yeah.
There is no substitute for having secret places designed within your home if you're going to stockpile food and other things, so that you can safeguard some things from pillaging, and so that you can choose to share. And one of my biggest sharing things I believe people ought to stockpile is rice. Rice is better than wheat, and because wheat needs a grinder, and although wheat keeps a lot longer, I like to stockpile a lot of rice, because you can hand people a handful of two of rice or a bag of rice. They don't need a wheat grinder to cook it. They just put it in a pot of boiling water. Mm-hmm. You can help other people survive. And yet, even though you'd like to share, the purpose of stockpiling is so that you can provide for your family. If you start to share openly with millions of refugees, you're all going to be starving within 2 days.
Yeah.
So what's the purpose of stockpiling if you're not going to secure the stockpile? Now, I realize that sounds selfish, but look, there's only a certain amount of people or percentage of people that are going to be wise enough to prepare in advance. Most people are not. And so you have to have a strategy for sharing at least a portion of what you can with people, but still securing and stockpiling. And in addition, because the violence does become real when people get panicky, I don't believe in confronting or shooting or killing people just because they're starving and they're hungry and they're demanding food. The wiser thing is to be able to get out of the way, get yourself in a safe room, and I have designed safe rooms for years. I know how to do it, how to conceal them. It's very important just to get out of the way so that you leave the door open, people come in and find what they want and they move on. But, to try to confront mobs of starving people with violence is not recommended. So I believe in a strategy that's more passive, more concealing, and to get out of harm's way.
Yeah, Makes sense. Now let's look at the geopolitical situation. A lot of the people that listen to the show are business people, and geopolitics does play an important role in business. Right now, there's a lot of talk about this Iran thing. A lot of people are scared that the Iranians are building a nuclear weapon and whatever. But again, if you look at Iran, they've got a lot of resources. They've got oil, they've got fruit, vegetables. It's a lovely place for tourism. They potentially can have ski resorts there, even places at the beach. So there is a massive amount of money that could be made by doing business with Iran. But on the other end, there is a movement of people which are against this moving the sanctions off. What's your view, and how do you think it's going to go?
Well, Iran is a very complex situation, and it's nothing like what is being promoted by the mainstream media. First of all, a contrast. Iran is no threat at all compared to North Korea. Mm-hmm. Do we see any sanctions on North Korea? Do we have any military threats against North Korea? Are we trying to make a deal with North Korea? Nothing. It seems like the Western world is treating North Korea with kid gloves, even though it has nuclear weapons, it has the missiles to deliver them, even to the west coast of the United States, and we do nothing. Now, how do you explain that?
That's interesting, yeah.
It's a very interesting conundrum, because Iran is a very civilized country compared to North Korea. It's a prison camp. And so you've got to understand and ask the question, why are the various Western globalist governments after Iran rather than North Korea? And the reason is that Iran is the only Muslim nation that is intent on developing its own weapon systems. All the other Muslim nations are completely dependent on either the West or the East for their weapons. And they keep talking about the Muslim threat of taking over the world. Well, it isn't a threat unless they develop their own weapons. And that's one of the reasons why Iran is trying to develop its own weapons, so that it realizes that the West has been somewhat of a predator ever since World War I, when they made those deals where they betrayed the Arabs, whether it was the French, the British, and a lot of the Arab nations and Muslim nations have become subservient to the West. And Iran is trying to break free. I frankly believe that Iran is trying to develop nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. They realize they're in the crosshairs of the West. It's only natural they're going to try to defend themselves. I'm not saying that Iran is a very stable government. It's not. The Ayatollahs are not. It would be much better without them. But the real reason that... So I'm making the point, geopolitically, the globalists in the West are intending to take down Iran because it's intending to become its own weapons producer. Israel has been tasked since 2004. We know that because of a leak from a secret meeting in the city of London, which is really has been one of the centers of globalist leaders conspiring to control areas of the world. Mm-hmm. In the city of London, they revealed that there was basically a financial advisor to the city of London who got invited to a meeting. Everyone thought, because he was a high financier, that he was part of the club, meaning that he was an insider. And he wasn't. And he was shocked when he heard them talking about how displeased the globalists were that Israel, who'd been assigned to take down Iran since 2004, has refused to do so, or has not been willing to do so. And the reason is that they wanted Syria taken out of the way first, because Syria had all of this retaliatory capacity with chemical and biological weapons, as well as Scud missiles. They could rain down thousands of missiles on Tel Aviv, and the Israeli Iron Dome system wouldn't be able to stop it. So the U.S. and other globalists agreed to take down Syria before Israel would have to take down Iran. And they were intending to do so by falsifying the chemical weapons threats that they claimed that Assad of Syria was throwing against his own people, which was not true. The U.S., in fact, brought in the chemical weapons through Saudi Arabia, and the rebels falsified the attack and blamed it on Assad. But so the U.S. decided 2 years ago that they were going to do a Libyan-style no-fly zone, which was really a cover for a secret invasion of special forces to take down Assad. And at a London press conference, John Kerry, Secretary of State, was sitting there fielding questions about the imminent threat of this no-fly zone to Syria. And one of the reporters asked Kerry, hey, is there anything that Syria can do to stop this? I mean, it's obviously you're intending to take down Syria. And Kerry just off the top of his head said, oh yeah, they could give up their chemical weapons and we'd have to make a deal. And Russia and Syria immediately the same day said, we accept. And Kerry was just thrashed when he got off that stage. His handlers were so incensed. You ruined everything by giving them an out. They took the out, and now we can't take down Syria.
Yeah.
So the entire Iran nuclear deal was invented by the United States as a means of excusing why they had to take Syria off of the docket for military invasion. Remember, there had been 3 aircraft carrier groups surrounding Syria or Iran for the past 3 years, or the previous 3 years. And they had an excuse to stand down, and so they basically they're setting Iran up for a violation. This agreement, and I've covered all of this in the World Affairs Brief in some detail, but this agreement is just a massive contradiction. They know that Syria or Iran is desperate to get rid of the sanctions, so they keep increasing the requirements of the nuclear deal. They finally get them to sign a deal, and literally they know that Iran is going to violate this. They've got a deal with the UN that doesn't require, where China and Russia has agreed not to veto any retaliation against Iran if they violated this agreement. So this agreement is not about peace. This agreement is strictly to set up Iran for a future violation so that after Syria is taken down, that Iran the U.S. and Israel will have an excuse to go into Iran. So the entire supposed opposition between the U.S. and Israel over attacking Iran is merely political theater. They are, Benjamin Netanyahu is a globalist, very much tied to the Western globalists.
But what about business in Iran? I mean, don't companies like Shell and that want to go in there and do deals? Don't McDonald's want to open restaurants all over Iran? And there's Hilton hotels to be built. There's ski resorts to be built. There's lots of business to be done with this country.
It would be very, very unwise to do that. Okay. The reason I say is because the temporary peace that this agreement will bring is a trap.
Okay.
And it's not going to last. So if people rush in to invest in the middle of construction, Iran is going to get declared in violation. There's going to be not an invasion. What the U.S. it's very unpopular for the U.S. to go in and occupy another country as they did in Iraq, and it blew up in the face.
Yeah.
They intend to annihilate not only Iran's nuclear program, but because Iran will retaliate against U.S. troops in the area, the U.S. will have an excuse to come in and using aerial power alone, they basically take down all of Iran's infrastructure and military infrastructure and bring it to its knees without an occupation. So it's going to be a very bad deal if anybody starts to invest in Iran. Take my word for it. It's a nation that's going to be taken down in the future. Now, afterwards, it could be rebuilt and could be very good, but I would wait until the rebuilding phase, not prior to this invasion, which I feel is coming.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what about there's a lot of talk now with the U.S. election that's going to be next year, and Donald Trump's obviously on the stage, and everybody's talking about him, even over here in England. Looks like the Democrats could have a problem with Hillary Clinton because of the emails, because of Benghazi and that. And there again, on the other side, a lot of the Republican establishment don't like Donald Trump. So how do you think it's going to play out? Who are we going to see running for the Republicans, and who are we going to see running for the Democrats? What's your take on this?
I have long said, as a political analyst, that I don't think that the powers that be want Hillary Clinton. And that's why they've allowed her to be destabilized. In fact, it's been so effective, the destabilization, that it's very likely that they're going to have to put somebody else up. But they don't want anyone really strong. That's why they're talking about Vice President Biden replacing her, and he's a very weak candidate. I don't think he can win.
He's also old. He's by the time he gets into office, he'll be like 73 or 74, something like that.
That's right. Well, the key thing is remember that what I call the globalists, those people who want a global government, they have to trick people out of their national sovereignty into global government through war, through conflict. But they control both major political parties in most countries. In the UK, they control both the Tories and the Labour Party, and that's why you don't see any real change. and then they control both Republicans and Democrats at the higher levels. That doesn't mean they control the lower level people who really do feel and believe that there is a difference and have a difference of opinion. So the Republican establishment is filled with globalist controllers who basically want predictable puppets like Jeb Bush or Chris Christie to fill the role. They know that American people are fed up with the Obama administration, extremely unpopular, especially the national health care system, Obamacare, and many other things like not enforcing the immigration laws and letting these massive millions of people come in. And this is a major issue, immigration in the United States, as it is in Europe.
Yeah.
I can't believe how stupid Europe is in letting these thousands and hundreds of thousands of refugees from the Middle East wars, which the U.S. and Britain are creating and exacerbating, and allowing them to come in, because the Muslim influx into Europe has been changing the culture and the dynamics and the legal and the criminal structure for years, just as the Mexican influx has been changing in America. So Americans are really fed up. But what's interesting is because the media is very controlled in the United States, and the media continues to push this soft view of immigration and threatening to crucify any Republican candidate who really gets strong about immigration, everyone's been nearly silent about it or bending over backwards to say, yeah, we'll accept some immigration reform and maybe some amnesty. But Donald Trump comes along, and all of a sudden he just with both barrels says, baloney, let's seal the border, stop this anchor baby stuff where you come in and drop a baby and you're an automatic citizen. It's stupid, obviously, done by court interpretation, not by law in the United States. But he has taken a stand which has resonated with the people. And the problem, though, you've got to remember that Donald Trump ran in 2012 and the press didn't give him any coverage at all. 2016, Donald Trump runs and all of a sudden he's front page. And the reason I believe the media allowed Donald Trump to get such a leg up politically is that they wanted to ridicule his positions. They knew he was inaccurate, generally accurate about the threats, but inaccurate at the specifics so that they could denigrate him. They could make fun of him. And it worked for a while. They got all of the other Republican candidates to basically say, oh, no, we're not like Donald Trump. We don't believe like Donald Trump. Yeah. They were all in retreat. And then they had to start to take down Donald Trump through the ridicule, and it didn't work. The point is, his popularity, the more the press attacked him, including the debate was not a debate at all. It was an attack by Fox News against Trump.
Yeah, it was staged. I mean, you could tell that some of the candidates knew what questions were coming, and they had the answers pre-prepared. You could tell.
That's right. And the ones that were direct attacks on people, there was a direct attack on Dr. Ben Carson.
Yeah, Ben Carson.
I mean, a direct attack. This is not a debate about the issues. This is a direct attack by the media on a candidate, and that's inappropriate.
No, I mean, I think that the debate question should be one question fired out to all the candidates. Same question to everybody.
On an issue, not on someone's background. You're not attacking a person personally.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but basically the media, it backfired. I mean, everyone came to the defense of Megyn Kelly, but really a lot of people felt she was out of line and attacking him directly.
Yeah, but you know that she didn't make that question up. Somebody told her to ask that question.
And of course, you know, the one that started out the thing, we want you to take an oath of allegiance to the one Republican who's going to win. I mean, that must have been written by the Republican Central Committee. So what I'm saying is nothing was more obvious to listeners than this debate was rigged by the establishment, you know, to get everybody in line with whoever. And the establishment says, you know, we're going to give them a Republican president so that we can diminish this backlash against Obama and the Democrats, but we're going to give them a controlled Republican. They'll think, as in George W. Bush, that they got a conservative, but he was a globalist puppet.
Yeah.
You see, and they got another, and the left got a globalist puppet in Obama. I can't believe how many people keep saying Obama is a Muslim, Obama is got an anti-American agenda, and Obama is pro. He's nothing of the kind. He is strictly a puppet, taking orders from his globalist handlers, and I can name the handlers.
Yeah, but what? So now with Trump's popularity surging and going up and up and up, and more American people. I mean, I think it was the other day there was an event in Florida or some state in the US, and there was 300 people at Jeb Bush's event, and 10 miles down the road Donald Trump was having an event with 30,000 people in a stadium. I mean, how are they going to stop Trump? Or is he going to trip up himself? Or is someone going to shoot him? I mean, what's going to happen?
Well, they basically, the problem they did, they started too early. They need the primaries are very manipulated. And one of the reasons why the powers that be refused to allow any states to hold their primary before Iowa and New Hampshire is because they know these two states' voters are very manipulable.
Oh, okay.
Iowa with their stubbornness, and their, you can find everybody in Iowa all over the map.
Uh-huh.
And so and it's a caucus system, by the way. It's not an actual primary vote.
Uh-huh.
In a caucus system, basically whoever throws the most money in the biggest party, getting people to come and vote for them at the caucus, wins. I mean, this is not a good primary. New Hampshire is filled with independent type voters. They're all over the map as well. A lot of liberals, a lot of independents, and some conservatives. But it's very easy for the powers to be to set the tone and to create a front runner by the primary. And they're going to have to wait for the primaries. They're already setting up, it looks like, through false polling to show Ben Carson is going to be the winner. If they can get anybody to knock Trump off, it's not that they want Ben Carson, in my opinion.
Yeah, because Ben Carson he's a bit disruptive, like Trump.
Yeah, they want someone to knock Trump off the front runner status so that others, like Jeb Bush or Chris Christie, they can resurrect. Now remember what happened in 2008. Mm-hmm. They tried to foist Rudolph Giuliani, a cross-dressing liberal, on the conservatives as their candidate because of him being America's mayor, even though he had much to do with the government operations in 9/11. But he was going nowhere. And suddenly Mitt Romney, with his own money, like Donald Trump, came into the race. And they realized that as Rudolph Giuliani was failing, that all of that would occur, the popular vote would recur to Romney. And so 6 major Democratic liberal newspapers came out and endorsed John McCain, who had less than 2% support, and suddenly boosted him to front-runner status. I expect you're going to see something similar after the primaries get started, that some controlled newspapers come out and endorse Jeb Bush or Chris Christie, somebody who's a real globalist controlled candidate. And they're going to try to...
Yeah, but what about social media? I mean, Donald Trump's... He's all over the social media. He's tweeting, he's Facebooking, he's Google Play. He's all over the place. How are they going to control that? Because that's Trump going out to the people and the people responding. And he's getting this banter going on between him and the people. And even if the newspaper comes out saying, we want Jeb Bush or we want whoever, I mean... How much influence does the papers do the papers have today when we're in a world where social media is becoming more and more prominent?
Well, they actually have a lot with what we call mainstream voters. And mainstream voters are by far in the majority. Your activists are active on Facebook. They're active on the alternative. They're active at the rallies. They go hear Trump. They applaud. But they're not the majority.
Okay.
And so ultimately, the media, because most people are too busy with their lives to really analyze the issues, they will listen to the media, they will vote the way the media tells them, and so don't underestimate the power of the mainstream to undercut the activists who are the minority in life.
So there may be all this hype then, but what you're saying at the end of the day, the mainstream media will cut through all the hype and deliver their candidate to the White House.
Yeah, and because there is this unsettling feeling about Donald, even as a conservative libertarian such as myself, I have real qualms about Donald Trump. This guy's had a Democratic background. He's been in favor of national health care. He's been in favor of amnesty before. He's really, flip-flopped on some major issues. He's been friends with Bill and Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. I
mean, no true conservative, no true libertarian has ever even thought of being friends with Bill and Hillary Clinton. So I don't trust Trump. I don't trust him to hold the line on the things that he's claiming. And he may well get discredited by flip-flopping. I don't know. This is a curveball that I didn't even see coming.
Yeah.
I knew that they were not going to give it to Hillary Clinton, that they were going to give it to some controlled Republican, but they're having to scramble. I think Trump is a wild card that a work in process that they're having all-night meetings trying to decide what do we do about Trump. And
Yeah.
I don't think he would make a good president, frankly. I just don't think he's stable enough. He will not read a script. Now, there's something endearing about that when you don't read off the script. But you can't be president of the United States and not have carefully crafted positions.
So what about this rumor of Mitt Romney coming back in the race?
Well, Mitt Romney, I don't have any confidence in, too. He's a true conservative, but he wants too badly to be elected. And so during the election, he bent over backwards to please the establishment, trying to avoid criticism. Yeah. He hired every CFR, Council on Foreign Relations advisor, which are all globalists, and he took every globalist position that he could, and yet the establishment still didn't want him. And that tells you something.
Yeah.
They still didn't want him because he wasn't controlled. They didn't have dirt on him. You can't have someone in the White House that you don't control. If he'd seen Benghazi going down with the ambassador being killed, he would not have stood for the stand-down orders to not go in and rescue the ambassador.
Of course, yeah.
As Obama just sat back and let his advisors handle it.
Yeah.
So there's a tremendous amount of conspiracy and control going on within the higher levels of all governments, including the UK and the United States. They cannot afford to have someone who's honest, even if he's trying to please them, because ultimately if he sees something really disastrous, really immoral going on, he's going to stop it.
Yeah.
And he's the president. They're going to have to control him. And Ronald Reagan was the last president we had who was not a conspirator, not a globalist puppet in office. Mm-hmm. And they had to throw an assassination attempt at him to make him a believer that you better hold the line or we'll kill you.
Yeah.
And he was very much more compliant after that assassination. They made a believer out of it.
Yeah. Well, what about the Democrats then coming up with a new fresh face?
I'm predicting that they'll come up with a new fresh face, but it won't be very electable. I don't think Bernie Sanders is electable to the majority of the American people. Vice President Biden isn't. Elizabeth Warren isn't. I don't think the Democrats have any place to go except to lose this next election.
Yeah, okay. So what effect do you think this is going to have on the world economy then? I mean, we see, for example, the price of gold and silver come down recently. Price of oil has come down. Economy has kick-started. Well, it's a lot better shape than it was last year and the year before. I mean, where do you think the economy is going to go with all these different situations that we've been talking about happening in the background?
It's a very complex answer. For example, gold and silver is only going down because it's heavily manipulated. Mm-hmm. I mean, extreme manipulation, naked shorts going on all the time. Nobody's enforcing the rules against the big banks, which are suppressing the price of gold. And they're, by the way, buying on the backside non-public purchases. They're reconstituting a lot of their gold reserves because of the prices that they've achieved. In other words, all of the sells are public and all of the buys are not public, or a lot of the buys of gold are not public. And that's why you have the price continually being depressed. The stock market, suffered a major correction, and it's crying out for a correction. The fundamentals actually aren't very good. You have negative and deflationary tendencies all around the world, and that's why the bubble of the stock market is an anomaly. It shouldn't be happening. It's happening because of the nearly free interest-free money that big banks and major Wall Street brokerages have directly at the Fed. They can borrow at 0.5% and churn their money in the speculative markets, like the Forex, like the stock markets, and gain anywhere from 5 to 15%. That's why their balance sheets are so strong right now. But clearly, they intervened to stop this market correction and balance it out. And it proves my point. I have been preaching against this October-September collapse scenario that a lot of pundits on the right wing are hyping. They're underestimating the power of the Fed to, in fact, continue to prop up the markets. The markets work more on expectations of money inflows from the Fed than they do on fundamentals now. And that's why everyone's so concerned about whether or not they're going to raise interest rates. Even if the Fed continues to raise interest rates, it won't be very much. It's not going to affect the markets downward. They'll be looking responsible to help support the dollar. I don't believe the dollar's in danger of collapsing as well. It's 10 times bigger than any other currency worldwide. There's no other currency that could replace it. And every other currency is a fiat currency as well.
Yeah, you see Putin just announced that they're going to be trading amongst the CIS states. They're not going to be trading in dollars anymore. Said
right, but you've got to remember that all the trade in the CIS states, or the BRICS, really is less than 10% of the whole market, of the dollar market internationally. So it's not going to drop the dollar. Remember, the United States is 50% of that market.
Yeah.
Europe is 25% of that market, and those two are not dropping the dollar. That's 75% there. Yeah. But remember that there's no other currency that's stronger than the dollar. I'm not talking. They're all fiat. They're all worthless in terms of eternity. None of them are backed. And forget about the yuan and all the rumors about a gold-backed currency from the yuan. Gold-backed doesn't mean anything unless it's gold redeemable at a fixed rate. And no currency is ever going to give gold redeemability because they want fiat money. They want to be able to print at will, and they know that gold redeemability means that as soon as you start to inflate, people trade their money in for the gold.
Well, what about the Bitcoin and these cryptocurrencies that people have been talking about? Is that going to be a way forward, or could that destabilize or stabilize the economy? I mean,
you've got to remember that the reason that the government has allowed Bitcoin to survive, even though they prosecuted every other type of alternative currency to the official fiat money, and believe me, they've gone after them with a vengeance. If they're gold-backed especially.
Yeah.
Didn't do so with Bitcoin because I think in reality the Bitcoin is tied in with government. And the government is using Bitcoin to track off-the-record black market transactions.
Yeah.
And building a record on people. I don't think Bitcoin is anonymous as people think. And
I don't trust it. I mean, I was thinking of investing in some, and I thought,
But it's just pure fiat money too. I don't care if it's private or not. The point is, it's invented out of thin air.
Yeah.
And so there really is no value in Bitcoin. It can go up or down as fast as it goes up. But I do think the telltale sign is government has prosecuted every alternative currency except for Bitcoin. That means they have to be involved, just as they're involved in every software company, major software company, from Google to Microsoft with backdoors. Windows 10 is a disaster in terms of backdoors into government snooping. People ought to avoid it like a plague.
Yeah. What about ISIS and their new currency they came out with, the gold dinar? I was reading yesterday. I thought that was quite funny, and they're showing their coins and everything.
You've got to remember that ISIS is a creation of U.S. and British intelligence. ISIS is simply a certain portion of the rebels that they created in Syria said, all right, you're going to be ISIS now. Uh-huh. And they did this as an excuse to be able to get back into Syria after the debacle of Kerry, stopping the invasion of Syria. ISIS is the way in which they're going to try to take down Syria. So all of the videos of beheadings are staged, even though people were killed. The killing of Christians, all of this is done to exacerbate the image of ISIS, to make it this group, to drive this phony war on terrorism, which continues to drive government power and the power of intervention. So the concept that ISIS could be one of the biggest oil traders on the black market and the powers that be couldn't stop it is just as ludicrous as it can be. The powers that be can stop any financial traction around the world, including ISIS, except that they're operating it. And so that's why it goes forward. That's why they've got another propaganda stunt about the gold-backed dinar. But remember, gold-backed means nothing unless it's gold redeemable. Yeah. Because nobody could redeem anything to ISIS because it's an underground organization.
Yeah, plus then you're not allowed to trade with them, so that's not going to go very far. Okay, Joe, what kind of message would you like to leave with our listeners as a sort of action thing that they can do to sort of make sure that they're safe and their families are going to be safe for the future?
My biggest message would be you cannot trust anything the government says anymore. In the UK, in France, in the United States, there are different motives and there are people at variance, but the globalists have a tremendous amount of control in these governments. My biggest message is remember that sometime in the next decade, probably after 2022, we're going to see a global world war. And you need to prepare for that. You need to prepare yourself financially, so that you're out of paper markets. If you have a lot in gold and silver, I'd make sure you get those liquidated because the except for silver dollars. American silver dollars are
So the actual physical coins, you mean? Have
the
those
actual
in hand.
physical coins, but gold coins are going to be way too expensive
Yeah.
to get change for anything if you're going to barter.
Yeah.
So silver coins are better if they're actual monetary units in terms of preparing financially. But cash is going to be king when war starts. The government's not going to be printing more of it during the initial phases of a war, where there's especially a nuclear war. And so what cash you have stockpiled in your home is going to be king. Don't depend on ATMs or safety deposit boxes.
So would you say keep silver coins in the house?
That's correct.
Okay.
You need to prepare for a shutdown of the economy for at least 6 months to a year once war starts. It'll be a black market economy. You need to stockpile. But my major threat is that there will be a major stock market correction, even past this one, but it will not amount to an economic collapse. Economic collapse never occurs, I want to repeat that, never occurs without physical destruction through war. And I include in that the so-called, the claim that the Soviet Union collapsed economically. It was a carefully crafted deception. The Communist Party directed it to go forward to get more aid and trade from the West. But even the Soviet economy only went down to a survival level. It never did collapse. Only the German economy during the invasion by Russia collapsed, and that's because people couldn't go to work. They couldn't do anything except run. Mm-hmm. Now that's the only reason and the only way that economic collapse occurs. So there's going to be a stock market correction. It could be as deep as 20 to 30%. There will be a global recession in that regard.
When do you think this is going to happen? What's the time frame for the economic collapse?
Well, I'm not saying there's an economic. There will not be an.
Correction. Sorry, the stock market correction.
Well, I don't know. It could. It obviously is overblown.
Yeah.
It could happen anytime. I can't predict when, but it's very. But remember, we just had the first attempt at a correction, and the Fed intervened and stopped it.
Yeah.
They were very effective. They have a plunge protection team that can put in billions of dollars into the market and turn around, and they did so. And they may do so again. I frankly think that none of the dire scenarios that people are predicting, whether it's martial law, economic collapse, or anything, is going to happen until war comes. Remember, when war comes, it gives the powers that be cover, because it's not their fault when the collapse occurs. It's not their fault that you have to have a new world currency, because it's the war's fault. Mm-hmm. They can cover anything under the guise of war. They can cover gun confiscation, martial law, forced relocation. They can do anything to us under the guise of war, because people have no defense against that excuse, and they bow down and just say, whatever it takes, do it. And that's what I fear. So I don't think they're going to allow everything to collapse before then, because war, they still get to come out of their bunkers and say, we're still your leaders and we have the answers for you. And if they would allow a collapse to occur before then, they would get the blame. They would be held to pay. I just don't think they're that dumb to allow that to happen. So expect them to use the tremendous power of the Fed to continue to create enough money to stop these collapses from occurring. Doesn't say there might not be a recession.
Yeah.
And that's why if you have real estate that you want to reorganize, sell to be able to get retreat property and things, the markets are good right now. This is the time to start to sell and market real estate. It may still go up for a while in this inflationary economy, but it's safe to sell now, and to get property that's more secure, get property you can grow food on. I believe in a two-stage thing where you have some property that's rural where you can grow food without danger of people overwhelming it, and retreat property, the mountains, could serve as a vacation, which in cases of real social unrest that overwhelm even the farms, get out of town, go to the retreat, stay in safety until things settle down a little bit, then come back, and you can start to grow food when there is famine.
Yeah, okay, so we got a good 5 to 7 years to prepare for all this.
I think so.
So that gives everybody time to sort of educate themselves and position themselves financially and strategically to be able to do what they need to do to survive.
And that's my message, that you do have time. That's the optimistic message. But when the war does come, and I can tell you with full surety, we will someday see war with China and Russia in the West, and it's not going to be pretty, and we won't be able to depend on it. So prepare for that in advance. You have time, but don't be in denial. And don't take your cues from the media. In my World Affairs Brief, I give you the full evidence of why this is coming and where the preparations are going. People, by the way, can get a free sample issue of the World Affairs Brief by emailing me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com.
Yeah, it's a great resource. I read it every week. So I suggest those that are watching and listening to get yourself a copy. And as Joel just said, just send him an email and he'll send you a free copy so you can have a read. It's very useful. I mean, obviously, I read the papers, I watch the news and everything in that. But Joel, you must take a long time to prepare those briefs because they're very well thought out and written, and very, very, very useful and insightful. Thank you very much. So, Joel, where can people find you on the internet if they want to sort of find out more about your books and stuff like that?
I have two websites. One of them is worldaffairsbrief.com, and the other is my name, joelskousen.com. Skousen is spelled Skousen. And you can get to either website from either one. So joelskousen.com or World Affairs Brief. On Joel Skousen, I concentrate on my preparedness aspects, my books, Strategic Relocation, The Secure Home, which is 700 pages on how to design high-security residences and retreats. How to implement a high-security shelter in the home is on there. Lots of good resources, do-it-yourself things that will help people prepare. And my other website, of course, World Affairs Brief, concentrates on the world affairs situation.
Okay, thank you, Joel, for being on the show. And we'll touch base again soon. Thank you.